Summon the, there's a Mark.
Oh, okay.
Everything okay?
Yeah, the microphone was off for a second there.
Excellent. Cool. So I'll pass it over to Mark. Mark is going to be talking about React hooks, which is a fascinating conversation, and I cannot learn more enough. I cannot learn enough about this. So.
Yeah, well, it's funny. So I am actually very excited to do this talk. It's a bit of more of kind of a code dive, and kind of leading up to one that I'm doing in a few months on React Query, where we're going to dig into those hooks. And in getting ready for that, I basically realized that I did not know hooks as well as I thought I did. And that people would probably want to have some basic understanding of them to be able to understand the next talk. So that is where we're at. I'm just going to share my screen, and maybe if I can get a thumbs up once you can see that, just let me know. I'm going to incept it here for a second. There we go. Okay, let's make that go away. Okay, so if I've lined this up properly, you should be able to see my code on the left, a very tiny browser window mid-right, and then the chat on the right as well. So, okay, we're going to try this. Let me know if people are having trouble reading things or want me to resize. If you want to follow along, I'm going to paste a link to my source code and notes in the chat right now. And you can find that right here. And I also wanted to shout out to whichever GitHub developer added this feature. It is an auto-generated table of contents on any markdown file, and it is wonderful. I have been asking for this for so long. It makes getting around so much faster. It just came out in like the last week or so. I just noticed it, and it's great. So you're going to see me using that a little bit during the talk. Okay, so on that note, what we're going to do today, we're going to learn about adding state, effect, and context to your functional components using something called the React Hook API. So if you've come from React from components, you might be familiar with some of it already. But the difference with functional components is that for a long time, you couldn't use any of those things. So you can use these React hooks to add those to our functional components and kind of continue that move away from class-based components to a purely functional model for React. A couple other kind of housekeeping things. I'm going to be using a tool called Vite to do hot module overloading and to avoid bundling things. It's similar to Snowpack, stuff like that. If you've used it, it's pretty cool. VS Code is my editor, just because most people use that. I have gone back to defaults. This is not my normal daily driver. I use dark theme and Vim bindings and all that. But for anyone watching today, it is a GitHub light theme and then just default keys for everything. We'll be using Google Chrome for the browser, and you may see me hop into React dev tools from time to time. Links to all of those are in the notes that I linked to. For anyone watching this, who are you? You are a React developer. Maybe you're new. Maybe you've used it for a while. Maybe you did something with hooks and you were like, what the heck just happened? That's why I want to talk to you, because that's me. I'm going to expect that you have some basic understanding of ES6 syntax, stuff like imports, exports, destructuring. Basic React experience would be great, at least knowing about things like render, but nothing too much beyond that. You should be able to read some JSX. I'm going to stop regularly for questions, and please, mods, if you want to jump in and interrupt me if I'm missing anything, do it. I do not mind at all. There's a link to the source code. I did paste that in the chat. And if you want to follow along, using Vite is really fast. It actually means fast in French, which is cool. I'm learning French right now, so I appreciate French frameworks. So I'm going to do that quickly right now just so you can see what's going on here. So we'll switch over, yarn install, and then yarn run dev. My window is really squishy there. And now you'll see it's already up and running. And you can see our little app over here. So quick preview of kind of the files we'll be editing. We've got a main.jsx. I'll close some windows here now. This is where our app is included. We've got app.jsx. This is kind of more the meat of our app. We've got two components that we're going to be really playing with today. We've got final timer, which is running right here. You can see it's just kind of counting the seconds as we go, and you can click a button to make time go faster. So nothing too crazy. Above here, we've got a work in progress. This is the component we're going to build out as we explore some of the hooks. So let me just check my notes here, see if I'm missing anything else, and then we will get started. Oh yeah, a couple other things. I'm not going to use TypeScript today for this. I do recommend using it. It does make understanding code bases like this a lot better. Use it in your own things. We're just not using it today. I'm not going to be diving into Vite, but if there's interest, I could definitely do a talk on that. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to be comparing with class components. I just found trying to do that, there was already a lot going on here and I was running out of time. I'm going to focus this mostly on kind of people who are newer to React, so maybe learning it for the first time or just coming to it and maybe already have not had a lot of experience with the component side of things, or sorry, class components. We're going to ignore CSS completely, apologize to the designers, and we are not going to test today, even though I highly recommend you test. A couple things that I definitely recommend you understand are JavaScript closures. So, oh, someone tell me it's pronounced Vite, pardon me. Yeah, if one thing you'll definitely want to know is JavaScript closures. Basically, this is the idea that when a function is defined, it has access to all of the variables and values that were in scope when it was defined. And that if you call it later, even if those are not still accessible from the calling function, they'll still be accessible inside the function. So basically, it's a cool way to kind of wrap values and maybe make things that are potentially hidden or no longer accessible through a function. So JavaScript closures, know them, understand them. They will make your life with React and React hooks a lot better. Having a general understanding of the React rendering life cycle is good too. It's très bien. What you're going to want to make sure that you really understand is the difference between rendering the virtual DOM. That's the kind of result that comes out of your function components. And then React is also in charge of taking that rendered virtual DOM and committing it. And it has control over both when the rendering and the committing it to the real DOM happen. So one of the things that you just have to kind of get your head around is that you're not going to be able to control that when you're writing your functional components. So you have to kind of build with that in mind. The other two things you'll hear me talk about, pure functions. Now, I think you could certainly make the case that React functions or functional components are not pure. But generally, the idea is that a pure function is any function where for a given set of inputs, it's going to produce an identical set of outputs. And it's going to have no other side effects on the system it's running in other than the outputs that it produces. So it's not going to go and set values. It's not going to go change things in your environment, context, things like that. So generally, that's what you want your functional components to be doing, is be pure functions and take anything that has side effects and move those into your hooks. Yeah, so that's it. Let's dive into some of our hooks. So basically what React hooks do is they are meant to allow you to go and integrate state, integrate effects, integrate a bunch of different things. I'm going to scroll down here into my notes. Into your class or into your functional components. There is a whole set of them that you will see in the documentation and in a React code base. React says there's 3 that you really will expect to use a lot: use state, use effect, and use context. In my experience, I would probably add a 4th to that called use ref. And I'll explain what all of those are in this talk. There are some other ones that you'll also use as well. I'm not going to be touching on those as much, just because in the case of like use reducer and use callback, I think they're fairly self-explanatory, especially if you are someone coming from either Redux. In that case, you know, use reducer is sort of like Redux Lite, and use callback and use memo. Both of those are more concerned with optimizing performance and things like that. So if you're getting to the point where you have an app where performance is becoming a consideration, you probably have dug into these a fair bit and could probably teach me a thing or two. So we're not going to talk about those too much today. So let's carry on. So in terms of understanding hooks, what we're going to do is build a simple timer component. I'll quickly jump over here so you can see it. So I'll reload this page. And all it does is every second, it increments the timer. And if you click this little button here, you can increment it manually. That's really all there is to it. It's pretty simple, but we're going to use it as an opportunity to explore the hook API and try out all of those essential hooks that you need to know. And hopefully, once you've done that, you can build something a bit more interesting. Oh yeah, one other note there. You'll notice there's a render again button. We'll use that as we go through this tutorial, just to trigger rendering of the whole app. Once you've seen the code a little bit more, you'll understand how that works. But it's just useful as we do some demos here. It's, again, not something you'd have in a real app. OK, so let's start off and keep it simple. We're going to go and open up a new component here. It's a timer component, and it is what is rendered right here in the work in progress. So let's jump back to Visual Studio Code. Open that up. Look, it's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. If you've done any React components before, you can see what you've got is a function. In this case, it doesn't take in any parameters. And what it does do is return some JSX. And one of the interesting things with JSX, for anyone that doesn't know, is it's actually run through a compiler before it's sent to the browser. And it converts all of your JSX calls there into calls to react.createElement, just passing in everything that's in your JSX to do that. So you can actually use React without JSX if you don't mind typing in create element or using the E shortcut for that a lot. But JSX just makes it easier and simpler to do. So this is a simple, pure functional component, very simple, very straight up. And as you can see, all it does is shows the time over there, or shows that it's a timer. Not very interesting. So the next step we're going to do is go and we're going to pass in a little bit of a prop to it. So again, this should be pretty familiar for most people if you've done any React. Initial time. So we'll pass that in. And let's say initial time. So if we come back here, we can see that that is blank. And now we'll start passing in initial time 0. There we go. So we're passing in a property now. Again, there's no state. It's not doing anything, but you can see that we're receiving properties in our function, which we'll use later. OK, so I think that's the basics. Basically, to review, we've got an app. We've got a timer component. Right now, it's purely functional. There's no state. And it takes in a prop, renders some output, which is then shown in the app. If there's any questions, you can pop them in the QA and chat right now. Otherwise, I'm going to carry on and get into the hooks. So the first hook that we're going to look at is probably the one that you will use the most. And it's pretty straightforward. There's a few gotchas, which we'll go through. But what it does is it allows you to set state within your component. And what state is really is a value that's going to persist between calls to render your component. And so if you're coming from a traditional class-based component, it would be stored in this .state. But when we're using a functional component, we use the useState hook. And it's quite easy to use. Hooks are really just standard functions, like JavaScript functions. By convention, they start with use. But beyond that, there's not really anything special to them. And they can be built up out of the existing hooks API that React exposes if you want to do your own or use them in your own components. So in this case, we're going to go and create a state to handle the time in the application. And that takes one parameter, which is the initial value of the state as it will be set on the first render. So here we're taking in that initial prop, and we're going and setting the state to its initial value, its initial time. And then from that, we actually get two things. We get time, which is going to be the current value of that state. And then we also get a setter function, which we'll use in a few minutes here. And in this function, we can access it just like a normal variable. So we're going to take time there and drop it in. And if we go back over here, we should see it says 0 seconds. And there's actually one subtle bug in this code. I don't know if it'll be a problem yet, but can anybody spot what it is? I'll give you a hint. It's something with the initial state. Okay, so this one tricked me up a little bit later in the demo, but what it is we have to parse this as numbered because we're going to be doing math on it later. And right now it is a string. So this is one of those times when having TypeScript would be nice. So if we come back here, yeah, it's all reloaded, looking good. Okay, yeah, I'm a big TypeScript fan, Ian. Okay, so we've got useState running here. Now, we haven't used the actual setter function yet, but one thing that we will do is use that in a second to add a little button that we can use to increment things. And as we do that, we'll also discover a few kind of unique edge cases that we have to learn how to deal with as we use the useState setter function. So a couple other things to point out too is the setter function can either take in a value or it can take in a function. That's similar to how this set state works before. But a big difference between this set state from components or class components, excuse me, and using the setter for the useState hook is that it does not merge any values. So whenever you call a set state, it is actually going to replace the state completely. So if you want to do merging, you can handle it yourself. But one of the differences with components, or with class components, excuse me, is that you can actually call useState multiple times. So one of the things that you'll see is with a class component, you have one kind of large monolithic state. Whereas with functional components, you can actually have multiple calls to useState. And by doing that, you can break it down into small chunks that don't need to be merged at all. So it can actually help with performance settings too, because you're breaking your state down into smaller atomic components. And you can group state with the effects and with the parts of the code that use them. So I don't know. I mean, I think that change to useState is actually a pretty good one, to be honest. Okay, so what we're going to do next is use our setter to add a button so that we can go timer ourselves. On click, go and pass in anonymous function here, and it's going to call set time, and we're going to call time +1. And what should we call it? What do they call it in the other one? Oh yeah, we called it the +1 button. There we go, +1 button. Come back over here. There we go, we've got a +1 button. And if we click it, woohoo, time is flying by. Okay, so at this point, pretty simple. We've got state, we're calling, we're getting the current state. It's the first value out. We're getting a setter. We're using the first value here to show the seconds. And then we're also using the setter to update the time. And one of the interesting things here is that if we go and hit render again, it's actually going to re-render both of these components. But you can see that time doesn't change between renders. That useState is remembering that time is set to 10 seconds. And so even though we're calling this function again, the first time useState is called, it's going to return that initial time. And every time after, it's going to return whatever was set last. So that's one of the differences where this hook is kind of, when you're calling it, you're almost calling out into the environment and getting a message back. So if you've used effects in things like Elm or other kind of more functional systems, we would almost imagine that we're sending a signal outside the boundary of the application using things like useState. Okay, let's check my notes and see what else I'm forgetting to tell everyone. Okay, yes, the other thing here too is we're going to talk a little bit about a closure. because this isn't really that important for this example, but later on, understanding it properly now is going to be very helpful when we start to deal with some of the effects and an interval. So here, if you look at our function, when we're calling it, every time render is called, it's going to run this whole function again. So it's going to get time, it's going to get set time. Then down here in the onClick, it's actually going to create a new anonymous function, right? Because when this is run, this isn't referring to an existing function, it's a new one. And when it's defined, it's going to close around the current value of time. So every time you click it, it's going to have the time from the previous render. Where we're running into trouble later is when we have times and things like that from the first render or from a couple renders ago, and we're getting out of sync there. So we don't have to worry about it here, but just remember every time it calls render, it's getting a fresh value for time, and it's binding that in this onClick handler. So it's nice, it takes care of things. Another useful thing about set or use state that's important to know is that set time, or whatever your setter is guaranteed to be stable between renders. And so when we're talking about something being stable between renders, you'll see this in the docs a bit. What it means is that you'll get the same object back every time you call it, regardless of whether it's the first render or the second render or the third render. So starting to understand which things are stable between renders and which aren't will get really important. So this is stable. This will change as your state changes. And anything that you're defining when this function runs, like these functions, will close again, and they'd be basically specific to that render. Okay. We're going to add a couple console logs here just so people can see that a little bit more, because it's important to understand. I'm assuming everyone is comfortable with JavaScript string interpolation, but basically this is a string format where you can shove variables. So in this case, we're shoving the time variable into a string rather than doing like time equals plus time, things like that, building the string ourselves. Okay, so let's open up our dev tools. I got that keyboard shortcut right. I always get it wrong in demos. Reload this. Okay, so we're rendering the app. Now you can see we're rendering the timer. And in here, oh, 1 second. Final timer has some console logs that we don't want. Let's take those out. We'll bring those back at the end. This is a preview of the final timer. Okay, that's a bit clearer. So in here, you can see we're rendering the timer. And every time I click it, it goes and renders it again. But you can also see that the value of time has changed. So in this function, time is going to be changing every time that we call it. Okay, so I've talked a lot about stability between render calls, stuff like that. I'm using a bit of weird terminology. This is a good chance to take a break and take any questions. So is there anything people want to ask me about all that before we move on to the real meat and potatoes of use effects? I realize it's hard to take questions here, but okay, I'll give everyone about another 10 seconds to answer. I'm going to have a sip of my drink and then carry on. Okay, am I going too fast, too slow? Do people want me to kind of speed it up or take a bit more time? Oh, I see a question popped up here. Yes, okay. So Bernard is asking if it's better to pass a function to set time. Great question. We could do the same thing again by passing a function instead. So here, what we're going to do is pass in a function that takes the current state. So in that case, the current state is time, and then goes and manipulates that to return the new state. And so that is something that is very useful to do if we're in a situation where maybe we have a callback that's from a previous render and we don't have access to the current value of time. In this case, it's not really a big win for us because it's defined right there. We're redefining this every render, so we know it's not going to be stale or from a past render. But we're going to see in a second when we start to use effects where that is more useful. So I'm going to take that out just for simplicity's sake. But yes, great question, and we will definitely come back to that. Okay, looks good. App is still running. Okay, so we're going to move on and start talking about effects. So this is more, when people are talking about hooks, you'll hear a lot of people talking about effects and side effects and things like that. So a great place to start is just by talking a little bit about what an effect is. So really, when we're talking about React hooks, an effect is anything that you would consider impure. And what that means is it's something where it's going to be, when it runs, its result is kind of indeterminate, right? So when we have functional components here, we're going to go and be able to say that for this set of inputs, maybe for this response from a hook or something like that, it's always going to do this. We can write nice tests to do that. We can kind of have a clear understanding of how they work. But when we're talking about effects, we're talking about things that are kind of outside of the scope of that single function, right? So network requests that call outside of your app, timers where they're relying on the passage of time and the operating system to trigger an event when a certain time is reached, and other kind of mutations that reach outside of the body of that function and are really reaching into your environment. And honestly, that distinction can become fairly subjective, and there's probably people who can define an effect within a function a lot more accurately than I can. But usually, yeah, I think about it in terms of React. I'm talking about network requests. I'm talking about timers. I'm talking about stuff running in web workers, things like that. So anything that is not really part of the body of rendering a component. So, and to capture this, React has introduced a very cool little hook called useEffect. And practically speaking, all you really need to know is that useEffect is going to go and register some code that gets run after the output of your functional component has been committed to the DOM. So after it's gone and taken the virtual DOM that we've got here, say, and after it's gone and taken that, put it in the virtual DOM, decided it's going to reconcile and commit the virtual DOM to the DOM. After it's done that, it's going to go back and call all of the functions that we registered with the useEffect hook. And by default, it's going to do that on every render. So what that means is that when you go in and register a function using useEffect, every time it renders, it's going to go through, do the whole function, it's going to update the VDOM, it's going to commit to the real DOM, then it's going to go and call your function. So I'm just going to cut and paste this right here so I don't make any typos. And then I'll explain what it is. So it's a very simple effect. And so all it does is goes and after this has been committed to the DOM, it's going to log out and say the timer is committed. And when we're removing it from the DOM, and so that doesn't necessarily mean removing the component completely. It just means that we're getting ready for another render. It's going to clean it up. So if we come over here, what we're going to see is, let's clear this. Oh, it's a bit emptier. I'm going to make that a little smaller. If I make that a little smaller, is everyone able to see those messages in my console? If you cannot, maybe speak up. Okay, Kelsey's saying yes. So in here, you can see it says the timer is committed. And what that means is we're in the DOM now. So if I go and hit my plus, it's going to go and it's going to update it. So it's now 1. And what that means is that the state has changed. So React knows that this component needs to be re-rendered. So it does that. But before it renders it, it's going to go and clean it up. So it calls this function here to clean it up. And what that is that's a pattern that you're going to see a lot throughout effects. They will go and when you register your effect, you pass in a function that will go and get run when it's committed. But then that function can also return a function. So it's a function returning a function. And the job of the function that it returns is to clean itself up. So when we're talking about bigger effects, this could be starting a network call. And if you remove that component, it's going to stop the network call because we don't care about it anymore. It could be things like talking to a web worker or spinning up a web worker or starting a timer, which is what we're going to do in a minute here. So you'll see this a lot where you have basically some effect and then some cleanup that goes with it. You don't have to include a cleanup function. If you don't return anything or return nil, it'll just assume that there's no cleanup to do. But almost like 90% of the time, you got something that you have to do for your effect. Okay, so right now, the other thing you'll notice is that every time I render, when I'm updating it, that's getting called again and again and again. So if your effect is something expensive, like connecting to a database, like opening a GraphQL endpoint or something like that, it might not be something that you want to do on every render. And someone is having connection issues. Okay, can people hear me? If you're having trouble, please let me know. Okay. Andrew, I'm going to carry on. But just so you know, I probably will do another recording of this at a later date. So I can make sure that you get a link to that if you're having trouble. Okay, so you can see in here, we're rendering on every render. That's great. There's lots of times when that's helpful. There's lots of times when you don't want to do that. And, oh, okay. Andrew has lost it completely now. 1 second. Okay. All right. I'm hearing we're fine. Andrew, let me know if you're able to join us again. So one of the cool things that you see with the use effect callback or hook, excuse me, and that you'll see on quite a few of these is that they have a second parameter where you go and you can pass in a set of dependencies. And it's just an array. You list one dependency after the other. One of the really tricky things is that a lot of people assume that these are parameters or arguments that are somehow passed to your function. So, they might be like passed in here or something like that. No, they're not. Really, the only thing that React uses it for is to figure out if it needs to call your effect or not. So right away, throw that idea out. They're not used for anything other basically than change detection. So if you need to pass values in, you need to find another way to do that, which we'll get to. So it's pretty simple though. So all you do is in here, we're going to pass another argument, and dependencies, they should basically be anything that it might depend on in there. So if we were going to, for example, log the time, we could go do like that, and time equals what did I do? Oh, there we go. So if we come back over here, yeah, so now we can see the time shows there again, right? Nothing too exciting. Now, there's nothing really that is enforcing that. Like if I go like this, you can see it's actually not going to make a difference. And you can also see that it's not getting called right now. And this leads us to an interesting use for these devs. So one thing that you'll see a lot is that you have effects, things like opening a network connection, starting a web worker, starting a timer, that you only want to happen once and only when the component is first mounted. So this was something that was pretty easy to do with class components. I see a question there, so I'll jump to that in just a second. It was something that was pretty easy to do with class components. It's easy to do here too. All you need to do is go and just include an empty array. And what that means is that every time React checks to see if it changes, it will see that it hasn't. And so it'll only call it the first time, and then it'll only call the cleanup at the very end when your component is being unmounted. Super handy trick. You will see this a lot. I would say almost every custom hook I've seen has something where you're using just an empty array there. So watch for that in your code when you're trying to understand it. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go and start to get into using our timer. And we're going to use one of the most basic kind of APIs in the browser, set interval. For anyone who hasn't used it, there's set interval and set timeout. The only difference between set interval and set timeout is that set timeout is set it fires once, it's done. Set interval will continue to tick almost like a clock on a set interval. So in this case, we're going to set something up so that every 1,000 milliseconds, so once a second, a function is going to get called. I'm just going to hop over here really quickly. Yeah, okay. I don't know how to mark that as answered, but I will let the mods do that. So in here, we're going to take out these cute little functions. We're going to put in 2 new ones. We're going to say setting our interval. And then when we do that, for anyone that hasn't used this API before, set interval returns an ID. And that ID is very handy because what you can do is use it later to go and cancel that interval. So forgetting to clean these up was like a huge cause of memory leaks and all sorts of other badness in a lot of JavaScript applications. And so React and hooks make this easy to remember because we're going to use our cleanup function. So in here, we're calling set interval, and then we're going to return a new function here, anonymous, that calls clear interval with timer ID, like that. Okay, this is it. We're in business. We've got a timer. And I think I've still got a console.log here. Yeah, let's get rid of that. No stealing the show, final timer. Okay, so in here, we set an interval, and now we're ticking away. So you can see that we know it's running. We know it's working. But we also know that it's not really doing anything. So it's not very interesting. So we're going to move on next and talk about how we can actually make it set some state and modify state from our hook. It's pretty easy. We're just going to call set time. And pretty straightforward, time plus 1, save it, come back over here, reload, 1 second, 2, 3, what's going on? So given what we've got here, I'm just going to keep that up for a second. There we go. Can anybody tell me what is happening here? We've talked about this already. So if you were paying close attention, and you have been paying pretty close attention, you should know what's going on. Anyone have any guesses? Yes. So actually, that's a really good answer. So it's actually very close to that answer. So the only difference, yes, is what Eddie's saying is that, so right here, okay, so there's a couple of things. So Khalid is saying you can pass the time as a dependency. That would be the first thing most people would think. And that's what I thought when I first saw this. The problem with that is that if I go in here, I can actually kind of make this work by doing that. And you can see it's ticking. But if I come in here, so you can see what it's actually doing is it's calling the cleanup function as then setting the interval again every time, because every time it renders, time has changed. And so we would think that that would make sense. But the problem is that in this simple thing, the only state is time. But if you have something, yeah, you can see that. If you go in here and have something else that's changing the state, then every time it runs, like let's say we had another setting for like is counting that could start and stop the counter or something, it would clear the interval as well. And so, you know, it's not a terrible thing for intervals because they're cheap to make. But if you were dealing with something like network requests, things like that, you could be starting and stopping network requests again and again and hitting your server a ton. And it just wouldn't be a great situation to be in. We wouldn't be using them very well. So the answer is not to do what we've done here. So we're not going to go and put time in as a dependency. We only want it to set the interval when it starts and when it stops. What we need to do is make sure that this is going to be set to the current value of time. So yeah, nice. That's a good suggestion too. We could move our state to a different level. So in here, like what happens is the very first time that we render timer, it's going to go through. It's going to create this anonymous function and register it with the use effect. It's going to look at its deps and say, okay, so this is an empty deps thing. Great. When it does that though, time is going to have a value of 0, right? Because it's just starting out. And the next time it goes and renders, it's going to look at this, say, oh, the deps haven't changed. And I'm not going to do anything with this effect anymore. So it's not going to register another one. It's still got the existing one. But the existing one is tied to that time that it closed over the first render. So what we need to do is somehow modify this so that it has access to the current state. So there's an easy and a fancier way to do this. The simplest way is to do what you suggested earlier, where we go and we, instead of passing in just a value there, we pass in a function that takes the current state and then somehow derives the new state from that current one. So if we save this, let's reload it so those timers in sync again. Ta-da! Everything is happy. It's working again. This is great. So in this case, we fixed this problem. And we could probably leave it here knowing that our timer was going to work. Having said that, there's times when it's not this simple. In this case, we have a very simple state where we can derive our next state from our current one. But there's other ways that we could do this if we had other state that we needed to pass in to do that calculation. So that's where there's another hook that is quite useful for passing things around. We're going to go into that here in a second. Okay, yeah, and let's talk about some terminology here. So one of the things that you'll see in the React docs and when people were just discussing this is this concept of stale state and stale properties. And usually what that means is that you have some kind of callback or effect or function at all that is closed over a value from a past render. So in the case of this function, useEffect had closed over the value of time in the first render and was only ever getting that value, right? And so when you've got a value from a previous render, we talk about that as stale. So it could be stale state, it could be stale properties that were set during that render and are now being used in future ones. So it just takes a little bit of time, honestly, to figure out where some of that stale state is coming from. But once you get good at spotting it, you'll find that you can see it fairly quickly. So I've jumped a little bit ahead here. So we've talked about using the timer function here. Let's talk about using the last hook that I think is really important for most people to know, and that's useRef. Honestly, this one is one that you probably won't use a lot. You definitely won't use it as much as useEffect or useState. But you will find there's times when you're using things like event handlers, maybe when you're calling out to third-party libraries where they're not going to have access to your setters, things like that. And you want to have some way that you can pass values between the different calls of renders. And so basically what useRef does is it gives you a fixed value that you can access that is going to be consistently available between different renders. So it's really easy to use. All we do is we come in here And we're going to say time ref equals uref. And it's a little weird. Honestly, you would think that like this value here, the time ref, would be the one that's going to stay constant and current between all of the different renders. It's not. What will stay current is this, the time ref dot current. So whether you're calling the first render, the last render, any render in between, dot current, if you call that on a ref, will always get you the current value of whatever that ref has been set to. And so if you set it, if you have a reference to it, sorry, from a previous render and you access dot current, if you set dot current to a different value in the latest render, it will get the latest value. One other thing too is that what you will see is that usually you want to call these because sometimes like accessing things like DOM nodes, maybe they're referring to a specific like value from the DOM. So often what you'll see is that these are going to be set, like you're setting current from an effect because you want to make sure that it's run after your components VDOM has been committed to the actual DOM. So you'll see code like this, use effect. And we're going to have a really simple little effect. And its job is basically just to go and update that ref. And it's going to do this every render. It's like a cheap function, so it's not a big deal. Equals time. And then down here, what we can do is just say, oh, time ref current +1. And so even though on the very first render, we got time ref and this use effect was bound to that, dot current is always going to be current. And so it should be updating. So let's come back over here. If I've done this right, there we go. Okay, so those are two different ways that you can kind of pass state between renders and make sure that it's always going to be current, even if you're working from a callback that was defined in a past one. You can either use set time and use the function argument to it to get the current state, or you can use a ref and use the dot current property to access that. Okay, so that's the body of what I would like to talk about today. There's a few other things. Most of them are not really going to throw you too much, but one that I will point out is something called the rule of hooks. And there's two of them. And these really come out of the way that React implements these hook callbacks. And so what it is that you want to go and keep your hooks at the top level. So it's very important that hooks are called in the same order. So if I added like a new state here for, say, const is counting set okay. If we added this here, and then went and later on redefined the order like this, or got really crazy and did something like, and then said if is counting. We're really going to break things because React depends on the order of these not changing, okay? So in this case, for example, if is counting is false, we're going to skip that one. And so any future calls to is state are going to be in the kind of wrong position in the call order. So when you have code like this, what you actually want to do is go and move that into like something like an effect or something like that, where the effect is registered and where it will get called every time, and then it will decide not to do work, but it's always going to be called in the same order. So you don't ever want to change the order of hooks, and you want to make sure that you are calling all of the hooks every time, even if you later on decide within that call that your effect is not going to do anything. The other thing too is the other reason why you want to call them from top level functions is that it can get really confusing if you have something like my super awesome function that does stuff. And in here, if you're calling use state, no one else is really aware of that, right? And so without having it at the top level here, it can become very hard to see. What you could do is turn it into a hook. So you could say, use my super awesome hook. And right away, that tells me that when I'm using it, the order I'm declaring it is important and that it will have an impact on how my code runs. And I see I've got a question here. Okay, good question, Bernard. So the question is, it says, the reason you still have use state after adding a ref to help update the time is just to force React to re-render. Yeah, so basically, refs are kind of funny. They're really just used by your code for passing values around. But React itself has no real awareness, I guess, of what you're setting inside of a ref. They can be DOM nodes, they can be just random callbacks, they can be parameters, whatever data you feel is useful to pass. But if you change them or modify them, React isn't really aware of that. And so it won't cause a re-render. It won't really cause anything, because a lot of them are actually happening inside those effects, which, if you remember, are actually triggered after the render is done and after everything has been committed. So what you want to do when using a ref is you're still going to have somewhere where you're actually reaching in to the state of the component. And whenever you want to change the state of the component, you're using set, like a setter that you get from the use state callback. If you don't use that, React doesn't really know about it. And so renders don't happen, things get out of sync, stuff like that. So great question. I hope I answered it. Yeah. Just to wrap up here, a couple other things. I'm not really going to talk about use context. To be honest, there's a few gotchas performance-wise, because if you have a big context at the top level and you change something, you can end up re-rendering half your app. Practically speaking, I've seen apps that re-render so much stuff when context changes. And for the most part, people don't care. So it's something where you could get into issues with performance there, but there's lots of kind of practices and things you can do to address that. Beyond that, though, basically you just create a context, set a little provider component where you provide the value for whatever you want to put in the context, and then you use context in your class component or your functional component to access it. And you can do that at any point below the provider. It doesn't have to be directly below it. It could be like 10 levels down, nested in your app. So great for themes, reducers, like if you're using React, things like that. Use reducer is another one. Honestly, it's one of those ones I've used a lot for like very simple states where the state is not going to be shared between components, for example, or in demos. Oh, Chris, I do see you've got a question there too. I'll jump to that in just a second. Yeah, use reducer is fine. I don't use it a lot myself. The times when I really want a reducer, I usually end up wanting to use Redux. I generally am using Redux less anyway these days in favor of other kind of state solutions, but Redux does still have really nice tooling, and that's what I find I'm missing with use reducer anyway. So yeah, I don't know if you're using reducer, you could probably just use Redux and be done with it, but your mileage may vary. Another cool thing is that you can actually use hooks to share code. I've found them, honestly, to be pretty simple. I have like an app where I've got like 6 or 7 kind of custom hooks. You just always start them with use, whatever, like just follow that convention for hooks that React uses. And it's been a nice way to package up behavior. So, I use them to package up GraphQL queries and applications. I have some where I'm like constantly polling data and things. So I'll have like a hook to help with polling data. They're also pretty easy. Oh, use memo. It's in the next section, Kelsey. Yeah, so really, if you're sharing it with hooks, you want to keep them as simple as possible. Another nice thing with hooks is that you can go and have a function where you can have multiple use effect blocks, multiple use states. And if you notice that you're starting to see those repeated between components, then you can pull those into one hook that you can reuse. And the nice thing is you don't have to have one massive use effect for every component. You can have 10 if you want. Same with the state. And so by doing that, you can start to decompose your app a little bit and identify common kind of ways that you can compose your functions without using classes and stuff like that. So I don't know. I found it's helped with composition and made that simpler. Before I go to optimizing, I just wanted to quickly answer Chris's question. Okay, Chris, it seems like hooks in use state could turn into a global variable nightmare. What is a good practice to avoid this? Do you wrap all your use state calls in the React equivalent of a singleton? So honestly, that has not been my experience. I tend to keep the state pretty simple. And so, in this case here, like where I've got use effect, I might convert that into something like use interval, where I have really something that like here on the interval, it's just going to do something on a tick. And so I would maybe have a use interval and its one parameter would be a tick function that gets called, and all the rest of it could be wrapped up. So, I mean, for me, I've found that like, if you can get your head around JavaScript closures and things like that, there really isn't a lot in the global space, and you can usually track down where it's coming from. That said, if you're coming from something where you're used to things being properties on objects and stuff like that, it is a little different. But I think it's something where it's really just kind of a different paradigm, and you don't need to make anything global, to be honest. I mean, here really we don't have anything outside of the scope of this function, and I think that makes sense, I guess, to me logically. And if I wanted to break it down, you can also just take these and make them into standard functions, that you define up here. And so you could have one function that has, a section for handling time, and then another for handling the interval and things like that. So I mean, I've been able to take fairly large functions that are multiple pages long, and by breaking them down into functional components, get them so that they fit down on a single page, and I can kind of grok them fairly quickly. But yeah, organizing is always a challenge for those, for sure. Hopefully I answered that question. The last thing I'm going to show here, I'm actually going to hide my code for a minute. I just want to show some of the dev tools that we've got here. Oh, I did something. Oh yeah, what did I do? What? This is what I get for doing live. Oh, I didn't save. Okay, so we're back. So if you go in here, I've installed the React dev tools. There's a couple interesting things. One that I use all the time when I'm profiling is this. You can just go and in the settings here, you go to profiler, not components. And under general, it says highlight updates when components render. And so basically what it's doing is it just flashes every time a component changes. And so, I was talking there about apps where they have 100 things that depend on the context. And so the context changes and the whole app re-renders. This is a great way to see that. You turn that on, and if your whole app flashes when you change one small thing, maybe it's time to break your context down a little bit and do some optimizations there. But again, just look up like optimizing your React context, and there's a ton of options. The other thing you can do too is you can come in here and do profiling. And so this is very familiar to anyone who's maybe used dev tools, things like that. But you can record, and then it tells you where you spent your time. You can get like a little flame chart showing you how long each thing took. Yeah, so you can see there, like final timer was bad. This isn't really a good application to show it in because there's not much going on. But yeah, you can see, when rendering or committing took longer than X amount of time, you'll see it shoots way over here in the flame chart, and you can dig in to see why that's happening. And then Kelsey, you were asking about, I'm going to turn that flickering off because that's really annoying now. You were asking in here about two other hooks. And so these are very useful. You will find that when it reaches the point where you're optimizing, they're important. But I think for most people, especially if you're just starting out with hooks, they're not a huge issue. So I wouldn't, like, people will get into big debates about always use callback, things like that. You don't need to. Basically, if you look at the way JavaScript works, two functions, even if they have an identical body, unless they're actually the exact same object, if you declare two functions with equal bodies, everything else, they will never actually be equal. And so what that means is if you have like a React component where it's taking in a callback, an on-click or something like that, it's always going to get re-rendered every time because that function is never going to be equal to the one before. So use callback helps address that. Basically what it does is it works like use hook, and I'm going to show the documentation here. React hooks, use callback. This is like one that is super confusing for everyone. Basically what it does is it goes and says, okay, I've got a function here, a callback that does something. And just like with use effect, it is dependent on these two values. And whenever you call this, it's going to generate the function once, it's going to save that, and then it's going to return it. And it's only going to generate a new function, so like a new closure, all that kind of stuff, when its dependencies change. Every time that it gets called, if those dependencies haven't changed, it's going to give you back the same function object. So not like an equivalent function, but the same one. And so what that means is that, let's say you have a component that takes in a callback and it's super complicated. Like it's like a chat widget or something, or just something that is going to be something you don't want re-rendering all the time if you don't need it to re-render. Using these memoized callbacks can avoid that. But again, that's something where you open up the profiling tools, you see those components re-rendering all the time, you deal with it then. Until that happens, I'm a little skeptical, and you can see really people go way overboard with use callback all the time. Use memo has a similar name, but it's actually a little bit different. So use memoized callback is something that we'd use when you're passing like a value into another component. Whereas memoized value is usually something that you do for a value that you're probably going to use within yours. So it might be calculating something, like the sum of a huge array, or sorting something, or something where you want to do it when its dependencies change, but otherwise you don't want to do that again, because it's something where you're using use memo inside render as well too. So normally you want to keep render really performant. So I guess my issue with use memo is that it's useful to do. It's important to optimize rendering. But a lot of the time, if you have some computation that is so big that it's affecting the rendering speed, then you probably shouldn't be doing it in your render function. You should be pushing that off into something that can be done like in a use effect and calculated in a promise, and then set after your component is done rendering. Or if it's really big, do it in a worker or something like that. But generally, the first thing I say when I see like use memo is, why are we doing this in the render function at all? It's probably not the right place to do it. And it's probably something that we'd want to do somewhere else, because yeah, this note here is quite important too, because React basically reserves the right to throw away any memoized values at any time in the interest of conserving memory and things like that. So like, again, it's just like render functions are bad places to be doing complex calculations. So that's where I would be like not against using memo, but if you have a lot of calls to use memo, there's probably a bigger problem and something else that you should be looking at. So again, build it, right? Profile it, then optimize it. Because yeah, you just see a lot of code bases that are like littered with those, and you can tell people are just using them because someone told them it'll make their code faster. But you can actually run into lots of problems if you get things like depths wrong and stuff too, and they can be a nightmare to fix. Other wrap-ups, There are a few cases where you still need classes. And I think this is covered in here. So right now, there's a couple callbacks, and most of them around errors. And so what this is sometimes if you're writing a big React app, you will have an error, and rather than the whole app crashing, you want just that little, component on the side that is like not part of the important email you're writing to crash. And so you can set error boundaries, they're called, where you go, and if there's an error, you render some nice error interface instead of throwing a bunch of stack traces at the user. And right now, if you want to do those kind of behaviors, you're going to be using classes. You just can't do that with hooks. Having said that, they're looking at changing how that works, and they would really like to be able to do that using hooks. Yeah, there's a few other ones. Use layout effect is basically the same as use effect, but it happens earlier before stuff is committed, and it lets you go and basically kind of update the DOM before it's rendered. So it can be useful for doing things like calculating sizes, stuff like that you maybe need to calculate so that you can update other parts of your component. Again, it's rare that you have to use it. I don't think I've ever actually had to use it in my code. I've certainly seen it in other code bases, but very similar. Use imperative handle works with useref, in particular if you're using useref with DOM elements. I didn't really cover that much in this, but you can actually put like ref equals and then pass in a useref in your JSX. And what you'll find is in your effects, then the current value will be the current value of a DOM element. But sometimes that's not what you want. You want it to be like an attribute on a DOM element or something like that. Use imperative handle will take care of that for you and let you customize that. Use debug value. Again, it's a little debugging thing. I have not really found the need to use it, but it can be useful if you're doing a lot of profiling and things like that. So yeah, that is really my talk. I have a couple questions here. I think we've talked about most of them. I'll come back to those. Resources, there's actually a ton of great resources out there. I have to be honest. I thought the React team had done a pretty good job in their hooks documentation. And if you have not looked at this, I definitely recommend checking it out. All of these articles are pretty good. If you are starting to understand terms like stale, render, closures, things like that, this will make a lot more sense to you. Yeah, just poke around. You'll find that you pick up the vocabulary fairly quickly. If you need help, you can always hop on our Slack right here, devedmonton.com, and join the Slack right there. Hop in Dev Talk, hit me up. I'm at Mark. I'm happy to answer questions. There's also really good Stack Overflow tags for React hooks. And React itself has a bunch of great communities. There's like a Discord server, all sorts of things like that. Stack Overflow again, lots of other communities out there. And yeah, I would also like to acknowledge a lot of the great work that Dan Abramov and Kent Dodds have done. They both have done a lot of writing about React in general and hooks in particular. There was a particular post by Dan Abramov about actually set interval that I have come back to many times when I'm trying to wrap my head around hooks. I think I finally understand it. Ask me in a week and see if I've forgotten it all. And I also just wanted to shout out to the doc team at React. They have done a very nice job on their docs there. If you're looking to carry this on, some great things that you could do is look at adding a reset button, maybe looking at adding a start and stop button, switching to using a reducer function or Redux, also adding some tests. Yeah, this is one thing that they actually have pretty good testing documentation with specific parts on doing hooks and things like that. So if you have not tested your React apps, I highly recommend it. It will save you grief later. So I think I'm just, oh my goodness, I think I'm over an hour here. So I'm going to stop talking. If anyone has any questions, I would love to take them. But hopefully you're going to be able to look at hooks in a whole new way and understand what's going on. And really, they're not that scary. They're just kind of weird compared to coming from classes.
Cool. Thanks, Mark. I think with only 25 minutes left in the Remo room, we want to leave a little bit of time for some socializing at the tables. If people have any questions, they can find usually the meetup Edmonton JS community there is really good for answering JavaScript questions. Mark haunts it pretty well. I'm there as well. So if you have questions about React, ask him and we'll try and see if we can get them answered for you.
For sure.
Cool. Thanks, Mark. I'm just going to